talking about today?
So today we got asked an interesting question about, what can you do to help keep your backpacking trips a little bit more affordable? And we were thinking about that, and we're like, yeah, I think there are a lot of good tips and tricks out there to help, in general, keep the cost of those backpacking trips down. We, like many other people, have the bad habit of getting super excited for our trips and wanting to invest in new gear last minute and buy new fun stuff all the time. So with this video, we're going to get away from that, and we're going to talk about
Do the opposite. How to make it cheaper.
How to make it cheaper, more affordable.
Backpacking itself, if you actually think about it, it sounds and feels like a really cheap hobby because you don't have to pay to sleep anywhere usually, but if you factor in the gear cost and especially transportation costs to where you're going to go, it can be expensive. So obviously the first thing we're going to tell you is the easiest thing to make your trips cheaper is to go local.
Yeah.
Cut out your transportation costs. But that's a boring thing to say.
Yeah.
We're gonna now talk, and we're gonna assume you're gearing up to go for like a really big trip. So the next point of advice is consider planning your trips around going to a national forest specifically versus a state park, a national park, or a state forest. Generally speaking, national forests, you can go camp wherever you want for $0. Now you have to check the regulations of the current forest you're in, but you can make a blanket statement and say national forests usually there are some rough guidelines on where to go, but it doesn't cost money and they're easier to deal with. It's a lot cheaper than going to a national park.
Yeah, and obviously whatever state you live in, like research your local state parks, state forests, that type of thing, and obviously they vary state to state, but we've found national forests to be consistently the most affordable places to go to.
Tip number 3, and if you've been with the channel for a while, you know this is something we do a lot of. Dehydrate your own food if you have the time and the means to do it. If you look at your trip costs, other than transportation, which will probably be the biggest cost, your next biggest cost is probably going to be food.
Yep.
And if you dehydrate your own food, now granted there's the upfront cost of a dehydrator if you don't have one, but you can make things like they won't be as good as a Mountain House, especially if you're first starting out, but they'll be pretty good and they'll be like a sixth of the cost of something like that.
Definitely. It's maybe you're dehydrating, or maybe you're buying the more affordable camp food. Your typical hiker trash food.
Yeah, there's other means to get cheaper food other than dehydrating. Go pasta sides.
Yeah, I mean, if you're backpacking on a regular basis, consider investing in a dehydrator, and then that'll help, in the future when you take your big trips, keep that cost down.
Another thing is if you're going for 6 or 7 days, you can bulk dehydrate food, especially if you're going with other people, and you can split that cost. And we did that for Isle Royale, we did that for Colorado Trail, and we were making like nice dinners for less than $1 a piece.
Yep. Next one's kind of controversial, and I have mixed feelings on this, but it all depends on you.
It'll make your trip cheaper though.
It will make your trip cheaper. If you can, and you feel comfortable, and you trust the people that you're with, you could potentially share certain gear items. So for example, if I didn't have something that was needed for the trip, like let's say we were going canoeing and you had a canoe and I didn't.
Yeah.
Like, I would, sit in the canoe with you.
We'd share the canoe.
We would share the canoe.
You could use that for things like water filters and stoves and stuff like that.
But please, 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 I would prefer that everybody try to be as self-sufficient as possible, but Kevin and I trust each other, and we share gear all the time. So if you have that type of friendship, or you trust the people that you're with, instead of having to buy something, you could potentially share a piece of gear. Alright, so one of the biggest costs if you're traveling, obviously, is transportation costs. The only tip that I can offer here is plan ahead. Yes, of course, like if we're talking about flying, you can get some great last minute deals here and there, but if you plan far enough in advance, you can really start to research how much it's going to cost to travel to certain areas, rather than waiting last minute, obviously, or waiting a month before to book your tickets or rent your car or something like that. And also, if you plan far enough ahead, you know, maybe you'll also discover additional resources for transportation that'll help you. Some things that we've done is, you know, like ride sharing, or so that way we don't have to rent a car, those types of things. So plan ahead and really research the transportation costs, and I guarantee you'll find some benefit there.
Piggybacking off of that tip, the next tip we'll say is, if you're going with more than another person or so, consider renting an Airbnb over a hotel. There are several advantages there. We use them for our trips. One, they're usually further outside the city and thus closer to the trailhead or something like that. Two, they're significantly cheaper than hotels, especially if you have a group of people. And then three, the nice thing about a thing like an Airbnb is you're going to have like a washer and dryer. You're going to have a kitchen. So if you need to do some last minute prepping, or let's say you're coming off the trail and you want to clean your clothes, Airbnb has that advantage. So if you're traveling and doing lodging, really consider an Airbnb.
Yeah, it's been a great service for us.
Next, another little trip we've seen from traveling for our backpacking trips. Do not buy stuff at your destination. Assuming you're going somewhere popular, stuff is more expensive there. So for instance, if we were to buy food at Isle Royale, it's an island, it's significantly more expensive to buy gear and supplies there. Just like it's significantly more expensive to buy stuff in Colorado than it is in Ohio.
Maybe.
It's just, if you get to these little resort areas, stuff, tiny little supplies, it's just more expensive. So assuming you live in an area that's cheaper than where you're going, buy as much as you can before you leave.
Yep. Next tip. Budget your trips appropriately. Now this sounds kind of...
It's a good life tip.
Yeah, this is a life tip in general, but this sounds kind of stupid, but I will say that we honestly do this. We break out our trips based on cost, and we assign cost to each trip, and then we ensure that we're meeting the budget goals of that trip, and that helps control spending. It sounds stupid, and you know, it may work for some, it may not work for others, but in all honesty, Kevin and I do sit down, say we're going to spend X amount of dollars going to Colorado, and then we're going to stay within that budget. And then one big mistake I've seen people do when this is you don't factor in gear upgrades. Again, what we talked about is like you get super excited about a really cool trip, and then you want to buy some gear. So make sure you factor that into
Want that new quilt?
Yeah, make sure you factor that into that budget.
Pack?
But I mean, sounds kind of dumb, but this is just good, you know, financial, you know, preventative care, I guess. Make sure you're budgeting properly.
Last little tip, it kind of piggybacks off of what Andy was just talking about. Build your trips around the gear that you already have. As sad as that is, Andy and I have been obsessed with the idea of pack rafting for the last like 2 years. We'd love to do a pack rafting trip. We're not going to go buy a pack raft for a pack rafting trip. Maybe we'll rent one.
Yeah.
But stick to the gear you already have for the trips you want to do. Try to avoid planning trips that require you to buy really expensive stuff. So the things that jump to mind are like canoes, kayaks, stuff like that, but it could be such things as bigger and lighter packs. Just stick to what you have. It'll be cheaper in the long run.
Yep. Well, hopefully this was helpful. I'm sure you all have some great ideas as well. Be sure to leave them in the comments below. As always, appreciate you watching and sticking with us. So thanks. We'll see you soon.